What if an empire, the most powerful in the world, was doomed by its own blood? What if a king was born more like a ghost than a man? He couldn't walk properly. He could barely speak. His body was a prison of pain. And on his shoulders rested the fate of millions. This is not a story of monsters or magic. It is the real and terrifying story of Charles II of Spain, the king who was the last of his line and the involuntary test subject of a genetic experiment that went terribly wrong. To understand the tragedy of Charles II, we must first understand his family's obsession, the House of Habsburg. For more than 200 years, the Habsburgs dominated Europe. They did not conquer with armies, but with marriage alliances, strategic marriages that united kingdoms, consolidated power, and created a web of influence no military force could break. But this strategy had a dark side, a side no one wanted to acknowledge. To keep power and wealth in the family, to ensure that not a single drop of royal blood mixed with common blood, they began marrying among themselves. First cousins marrying first cousins, uncles marrying their own nieces, aunts marrying their own nephews. Over generations, the Habsburg family tree began to look less like a tree and more like a closed circle, a labyrinth where the same bloodlines crossed obsessively. The blood was never renewed. Instead, it became concentrated, intensified, increasingly pure, and increasingly defective. Genetically, this was an unprecedented catastrophe. All of us carry recessive genes that can cause diseases, deformities, and health problems. Most of the time, these genes are masked by a healthy gene inherited from the other parent. It's like having an instruction manual with a few torn pages, but also having a second intact manual to rely on. Among the Habsburgs, the chances of a child inheriting two copies of the same defective gene skyrocketed exponentially. Both manuals were damaged. And from this emerged the family's trademark, the Habsburg jaw. A lower jaw so large, so protruding, that the mouth could not close properly. It impaired speech, made eating painful, and created an appearance impossible to hide. Generations of Habsburg monarchs carried this visible mark of their own inbreeding. But this was only the tip of the iceberg. The true genetic devastation was yet to come. It was waiting for a king who would become the living embodiment of all his family's mistakes. In 1661, the personification of this genetic disaster was born, Charles II. His father, King Philip IV of Spain, married his own niece, Mariana of Austria. Hence the family motto, "Let others wage war. You, happy Austria, marry." The groom was 30 years older than the bride. She was a teenager when she was given to a man who was essentially a stranger, a man who was also her uncle. This was the reality of European politics in the 17th century. Marriage was not about love or compatibility. It was about power, about consolidating kingdoms, about keeping royal blood pure. Of the 5 children they had, only Charles survived infancy. The other 4 died before the age of 5, an infant mortality rate alarming even by the standards of the time. And from the very beginning, it was clear that something was terribly wrong with the sole survivor. He was a frail child, plagued by illness. He did not begin speaking until the age of 4 and did not manage to walk until he was 8. Imagine being a prince, the heir to one of the greatest empires in the world, and being unable to do what ordinary children do naturally. His tongue was so large that he could barely articulate words and drooled constantly. His body was weak. His muscles failed to develop normally. His mind seemed slow, as if operating at a different speed from the rest of the world. Courtiers whispered about him. Ladies of the court kept their distance. He was an anomaly, an aberration, a prince who did not seem like a prince at all. The Spanish court physicians were baffled. They tried everything: bloodletting to balance the humors, potions made from strange ingredients, baths in holy waters. Nothing worked. The child remained fragile, sickly, different. In an age of superstition, where science and magic still blended in people's minds, the Spanish court did not see inbreeding as the cause. They saw witchcraft. They saw curses. The people nicknamed him El Hechizado, the Bewitched. It was believed he was the victim of a supernatural curse, that demons inhabited his fragile body. Exorcists were summoned to the palace to expel the demons said to torment the young prince. Priests prayed over him. Sacred relics were placed in his chamber. Nothing worked. Because the true enemy was not supernatural, it was genetic. No prayer could rewrite his genetic code. Modern studies have calculated his inbreeding coefficient at 0.254. To put this into perspective, that is higher than the coefficient of a child born to a brother and sister. In essence, genetically speaking, his parents were equivalent to siblings. He was a genetic dead end, the final product of centuries of decisions that prioritized power over health, wealth over well-being. Upon his father's death, Charles became king of an empire that spanned the globe, territories in Europe, the Americas, and Asia, an empire where the sun never set. But he was king in name only. Apathetic, childlike, prone to epileptic seizures and bouts of mental confusion. Real power was exercised by his mother, Mariana of Austria, and by rival advisors who fought among themselves, using the weak king as a pawn in their political games. Charles was a puppet, a king who reigned but did not rule, a hollow symbol of power without the physical or mental capacity to wield it. Ministers competed for his attention, for his signature on documents he barely understood. The machinery of the Spanish government continued to function, but without true leadership, without clear vision, without a captain at the helm. His primary and essentially only duty was to produce an heir to continue the Habsburg line in Spain. The pressure was immense. European politics revolved around a single question: would Charles have a child? If not, who would inherit the throne? The great powers waited, negotiated, conspired. The answer would determine the future of the continent. He married twice. His first wife, the beautiful Marie-Louise d'Orléans, was reportedly horrified upon meeting him, but fulfilled her duty with compassion. She was young, intelligent, and beautiful, married to a man who was essentially a child trapped in an adult's body. Years passed. No child came. The court turned to potions, prayers, and holy relics, desperate for a miracle that would never arrive. After Marie-Louise's death, he married again, Maria Anna of Neuburg, an ambitious woman who hoped to succeed where her predecessor had failed. Once more, Spain waited, and once more, the throne remained empty. Charles was impotent and, most likely, sterile. The curse of his blood was not merely a personal tragedy, it was a political crisis that placed all of Europe on the brink of war. Diplomats from every European power watched his every move, every rumor of a possible heir, every whisper about his health. Who would inherit the vast Spanish Empire? The French sought to place one of their princes on the throne, expanding their power and influence. The Austrians wanted to keep the crown within the Habsburg family, preserving their dynastic legacy. The English and the Dutch feared an excessive concentration of power in a single hand, threatening the delicate balance of Europe. And Charles, at the center of it all, was powerless to resolve the question that would define his legacy. His infertility was a ticking time bomb, and everyone knew it. Charles II died in 1700, just short of his 39th birthday. He looked like a man of 80. His body was ruined, consumed by illnesses no physician could name or treat. The autopsy that followed shocked even doctors of the 17th century, men accustomed to dissections and horrific sights. The report described a body almost devoid of blood, as if life had drained from him long before death. Rotten, gangrenous intestines, a single testicle black as coal, a heart the size of a peppercorn, lungs filled with fluid, an empty stomach. His internal organs were a map of decay and failure, a visual testament to the devastation wrought by inbreeding. He should not have lived as long as he did. That he reached the age of 39 was a medical miracle, proof that the human body is more resilient than we imagine, even when every fiber of it is working against itself. In his will, he named the great-nephew of the King of France as his heir. The House of Habsburg, which had ruled Spain for nearly 2 centuries, was extinct. The blood they had worked so hard to keep pure had finally run dry. The direct line had ended. There were no more heirs. No future for the dynasty that had shaped Europe. His death without a direct heir triggered the War of the Spanish Succession, a brutal conflict that lasted more than a decade and involved all the major European powers. French, English, Dutch, Austrians, Portuguese, all fighting for control of the Spanish Empire. Hundreds of thousands died, cities were destroyed, kingdoms were reshaped. The personal tragedy of a single king became the catastrophe of an entire continent. The story of Charles II is a cautionary tale, a dark lesson in how pride and obsession with blood purity can doom a dynasty. He was neither a tyrant nor a conqueror. In many ways, he was a victim, the final victim of a long chain of decisions that sealed his fate before he was even born. His parents created him, his grandparents created him, his great-grandparents created him. Centuries of choices converged to produce a man genetically incapable of being king. Today, we understand the science behind his condition. We know about recessive genes, inbreeding coefficients, and how lack of genetic diversity leads to collapse. But to the people of the 17th century, he remained the bewitched, a tragic enigma whose suffering shook an empire and redrew the map of the world. His legacy is not monuments or conquests, but a chilling question. What is the price of power? And how much are we willing to pay for it? The story of Charles II reminds us that the consequences of our choices can echo through centuries, affecting millions we will never know. That power without wisdom is a dangerous weapon, and that sometimes the greatest tragedy is not the death of a man, but the legacy he leaves behind. What do you find most shocking about the story of Charles II? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this journey through history, subscribe for more.